Well, the South African consumer has proven resilient in the face of high inflation and interest rates. This is over and above challenges like load shedding and poor local government service delivery, amongst other issues. This is the assessment of restaurant industry player Famous Brands, which released its half-year results ended August 2023 today. Despite a challenging operating environment, the company reported half-year revenue up 10% at 3.9 billion rand, although operating profit came down 6% to 371 million rand, with profit margins being hit by the high cost of doing business. Well, in other news at this hour, the Security Council is holding an open debate this afternoon on the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. Let's take you live there to the meeting underway in New York.
Of civilians or the launching of rockets against civilian targets. All hostages must be treated humanely and released immediately and without conditions. And I respectfully note the presence among us of members of their families. Excellencies, it is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. They have seen their land steadily devoured by settlements and plagued by violence, their economy stifled, their people displaced, and their homes demolished. Their hopes for a political solution to their plight have been vanishing. But the grievances of the Palestinian people cannot justify the appalling attacks by Hamas, and those appalling attacks cannot justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. Excellencies, even war has rules. We must demand that all parties uphold and respect their obligations under international humanitarian law, take constant care in the conduct of military operations to spare civilians, and respect and protect hospitals, and respect the inviolability of UN facilities, which today are sheltering more than 600,000 Palestinians. The relentless bombardment of Gaza by Israeli forces, the level of civilian casualties, and the wholesale destruction of neighborhoods continue to mount and are deeply alarming. I mourn and honor dozens of UN colleagues working for UNRWA. Sadly, at least 35 and counting, killed in the bombardment of Gaza over the last 2 weeks. I owe to their families my condemnation of these and many other similar killings. The protection of civilians is paramount in any armed conflict. Protecting civilians can never mean using them as human shields. Protecting civilians does not mean ordering more than 1 million people to evacuate to the south, where there is no shelter, no food, no water, no medicine, and no fuel, and then continuing to bomb the south itself. I am deeply concerned about the clear violations of international humanitarian law that we are witnessing in Gaza. Let me be clear, no party to an armed conflict is above international humanitarian law. Excellencies, thankfully some humanitarian relief is finally getting into Gaza, but it is a drop of aid in an ocean of need. In addition, our UN fuel supplies in Gaza will run out in a matter of days, and that would be another disaster. Without fuel, aid cannot be delivered, hospitals will not have power, and drinking water cannot be purified or even pumped. The people of Gaza need continuous aid delivery at a level that corresponds to the enormous needs. And that aid must be delivered without restrictions. I salute our UN colleagues and humanitarian partners in Gaza working under hazardous conditions and risking their lives to provide aid to those in need. They are an inspiration. To ease epic suffering, make the delivery of aid easier and safer, and facilitate the release of hostages, I reiterate my appeal for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Excellencies, even in this moment of grave and immediate danger, we cannot lose sight of the only realistic foundation for a true peace and stability, a two-state solution. Israelis must see their legitimate needs for security materialized, and Palestinians must see their legitimate aspirations for an independent state realized in line with United Nations resolution, international laws, and previous agreements. And finally, we must be clear on the principle of upholding human dignity. Polarization and dehumanization are being fueled by a tsunami of disinformation. We must stand up to the forces of anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim bigotry, and all forms of hate. Mr. President, Excellencies, today is United Nations Day, marking 78 years since the UN Charter entered into force. That Charter reflects our shared commitment to advance peace, sustainable development, and human rights. On this UN Day, at this critical hour, I appeal to all to pull back from the brink before the violence claims even more lives and spreads even further. Thank you very much.
I thank the Secretary General for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Thor Venneland.
Mr. President, Excellencies, members of the Security Council, I thank you for your sustained attention to the grave developments unfolding in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory, particularly in and around Gaza. In light of the horrific violence of these past weeks, allow me to begin by expressing my most sincere condolences to the thousands of families in Israel, Palestine, and across the globe who are in mourning, in shock, and in profound pain. This includes the families of 35 UN staff killed in Gaza. The abhorrent attack launched by Hamas on 7 October and Israel's devastating, ongoing military operation in Gaza have taken a staggering toll on civilians and deeply shaken Israelis and Palestinians alike. As I told this Council last week, and the Secretary General has just expressed, the events we are witnessing are unprecedented. They risk expanding to the wider region and may have profound long-term impact on the dynamics of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Mr. President, on the morning of 7 October, Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups launched a large-scale complex assault on Israel. The unprecedented attack saw an estimated 1,500 Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad militants from Gaza infiltrate some 20 Israeli communities and military facilities in the Gaza periphery, by land, sea and air, while thousands of rockets were launched towards central Israel, including Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Testimony and evidence emerging from the tragic day reveal a sickening killing spree, designed to terrorize, with appalling scenes of brutality, massacres, hostage-taking, including against infants and young children. In all, Hamas and other Palestinian militant groups killed over 1,400 Israelis and foreign nationals, the bloodiest attack in Israel's history. This includes over 1,000 civilians, many of them women and children, and over 360 security forces personnel. Over 5,400 Israelis were injured. At least 220 civilians, including women and children, as well as soldiers, were abducted and taken into Gaza Strip as hostages. While not confirmed, Hamas has said that 22 hostages were killed by Israeli strikes. I welcome the release of 4 hostages and recognize the important role of Qatar in this regard. To the families of hostages, some of whom are with us today, the fear and uncertainties you have had to endure is unimaginable. As the Secretary General and I have said repeatedly, your loved ones must be returned to you immediately and unconditionally. Heavy fighting between Israeli forces and militants inside the Israeli communities continued until 10 October, when the Israeli Defense Forces said it regained control of the perimeter fence. Over 120,000 Israelis were displaced from the area. Hamas and other Palestinian militant groups in Gaza have continued to launch indiscriminate rocket fire from Gaza into Israel, reaching as far as north as Haifa. To date, according to Israeli sources, some 7,700 rockets have been launched. Mr. President, on the day of the attack, Israeli Security Cabinet declared a state of war for the first time in over 50 years, with the aim of, quote, the destruction of the military and governing capabilities of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, unquote. That same day, Israeli forces began a massive bombardment of what they said were Hamas sites throughout Gaza. Israeli air assaults in the Strip has continued to date, with some 5,000 such sites targeted, according to the IDF. On 8 October, Israeli Minister for Defense announced a complete siege of Gaza, blocking all entry of goods, including electricity, water, food, fuel, and medical equipment. The airstrikes have been devastating and resulted in a staggering number of Palestinian fatalities, a vast number of whom are civilians. Thus far, the Ministry of Health in Gaza has reported over 5,000 Palestinians killed, including 1,100 women, 2,000 children, as well as journalists, medical workers, and first responders, with more than 15,000 injured. Authorities estimate that hundreds more lay dead or injured under rubble as rescue effort languish amid continuous airstrike. Over 1 million Palestinians have been displaced. The level of physical destruction has left entire neighborhoods in rubble, and critical infrastructure has been destroyed or damaged. Schools, including UNRWA schools and hospitals, many sheltering displaced Palestinians, have been hit. Displacement levels are unprecedented. Compounding the destruction from airstrikes, the humanitarian impact has been immense. In this regard, I welcome Egypt's facilitation to open Rafah border crossing on 21 October and reiterate the humanitarian assistance needs to flow safely and continuously into the Strip. I echo the Secretary General's appeal for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Lynn Hastings, the humanitarian coordinator in the OPT, will report in full on the humanitarian situation on behalf of the Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, Martin Griffiths. Mr. President, the risk of significant further deterioration in the situation of the occupied West Bank or spillover of the conflict in the region remain significant. Violence in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, already at worrying level, has increased since the outbreak of the war. Israeli authorities have imposed widespread movement restriction and conducted extensive arrests. High number of daily clashes and armed exchanges between Palestinians and Israeli security forces and settlers have been recorded, as well as settler-related violence and Palestinian attacks against the Israelis. Since 7 October, 93 Palestinians, including 27 children, have been killed by ISF or settlers, and 1 Israeli security personnel was killed in an armed exchange. Large demonstrations in solidarity with the Gaza population took place in cities across the West Bank, with some leading to confrontation with Palestinian security forces. Meanwhile, across the Blue Line and amid heightened rhetoric and actors on the ground, there have been daily intermittent but intense exchanges of fire since 8 October. Hezbollah, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad have launched rockets and anti-tank missiles towards Israel, while IDF responded with artillery fire and airstrikes, leading to casualties on both sides. On 13 and 20 October, 2 journalists were killed. Palestinian militants from Lebanon have also made several infiltration attempts, the most significant on 9 October. Over 80,000 Israelis have been evacuated from homes, and some 20,000 Lebanese have been displaced. On the Golan, the Israeli Defense Forces responded on 10 October with artillery and mortar shells towards what they said were a number of launches from Syria towards Israel. Syrian state media reported Israeli air attacks on 12 and 22 October, targeting the international airports of Damascus and Aleppo, and on 14 October, Aleppo International Airport. UNDOF continued to engage with both parties urging them to exercise maximum restraints in respect of their obligation under the 1974 agreement on the disengagement of forces. Mr. President, the Secretary General has been very clear in expressing the UN condemnation of the horrific attacks by Hamas and others on 7 October and deep alarm of the scale of Israeli airstrikes and the scope of civilian casualties and destruction in Gaza. Over this past week, the Secretary General and I have been pursuing any and every opportunity to address the situation on the ground and to prevent further civilian death and misery. It is critical that we, as a united international community, employ all our collective efforts to end the bloodletting and prevent the further expansion of hostilities, including in the region. The stakes are astronomically high, and I appeal for all relevant actors to act responsibly. Any miscalculation could have immeasurable consequences. In this regard, I welcome Egypt's convening of the Cairo Peace Summit on 21 October and the efforts of the state in the region and beyond to address the unfolding humanitarian catastrophe before us and to pave the way for unlocking a real and serious peace process. Mr. President, these devastating events are not divorced from the broader context of the occupied Palestinian territory, Israel, and the region, where dynamics are deeply intertwined. The unresolved conflict and continued occupation shape the reality of every Israeli and every Palestinian. For 15 years, the Palestinian population have been living under militant rule and a strict closure regime as the Palestinian divide hardened. For a generation, hope has been lost, and despair has prevailed for those who see prospect for a more peaceful future pulling still further away. Only a political solution will move us forward. The steps we take to address these crises must be implemented in a way that ultimately advances a negotiated peace and fulfills the legitimate national aspiration of Palestinians and Israelis, the long-held vision of two states in line with UN resolution, international law, and previous agreements. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Venezuelan for his briefing, and I now give the floor to Mrs. Lynn Hastings.
Mr. President, thank you for this opportunity to update the Security Council on behalf of Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator Martin Griffiths. At the outset, I want to welcome the release of 2 hostages on Saturday and another 2 yesterday. We are grateful to the Arab Republic of Egypt and the Emir of Qatar for mediating their release, and to the International Committee of Red Cross for facilitating. However, the more than 200 hostages still being held must be released without condition or any further delay. We welcome all diplomatic efforts to secure their release and demand that, in the interim, they be treated humanely and be allowed to receive visits from the ICRC. As intense airstrikes continue to rain down on Gaza, and as indiscriminate rockets fly into Israel, death, injury, destruction, and displacement are mounting. On the Israeli side, the fatality toll is more than 3 times the cumulative number of Israelis killed since OCHA began recording casualties in 2005. In Gaza, the reported Palestinian fatality toll of the past 17 days is more than double the total number of fatalities of the entire 2014, a war which lasted 50 days. Women and children comprise some 62% of these victims. The number of those who are internally displaced has swelled to 1.4 million. Nearly 600,000 people are sheltering in UNRWA facilities in increasingly dire conditions. The average number of IDPs per shelter has reached 2.5 times the capacity. As my colleagues have repeatedly highlighted, there is nowhere to seek refuge in Gaza. When it comes to decisions on whether and where to flee, civilians are damned if they do and damned if they don't. Displaced families are reportedly returning to North Gaza due to ongoing bombardments because their basic needs, including safety, cannot be met in the south. I reiterate that civilians must be protected and have the essentials they need to survive, whether they move or if they stay. To give you an idea of the scale of destruction, according to the Gaza Ministry of Housing, at least 42% of all housing units in the Strip have already been either destroyed or damaged since October 7th. The scale of destruction calls into question the ability of people to ever return to their homes. Meanwhile, Gaza remains under a full electricity blackout. Hospitals are on the brink of collapse due to shortages of electricity, medicine, equipment, specialized personnel, and the damage and destruction. Patients are being treated on the floors due to a shortage of beds. Doctors are being forced to operate without anesthesia. Since the 7th of October, 16 health workers in Gaza have reportedly been killed and 30 injured while on duty. Mr. President, in the middle of this tumult, the agreement to use Rafah crossing from Egypt to get essential humanitarian supplies into Gaza has provided a glimmer of hope to people living in the appalling conditions. This past weekend, 34 trucks entered Gaza with life-saving supplies, and another 20 crossed Rafah into Gaza yesterday. 20 more of those are due to cross today. We welcome this important development, and we pledge to do our part to ensure these deliveries increase and continue. But these deliveries are a drop in the bucket compared to the vast scale of needs. They amount to no more than 4% of the daily average volume of commodities entering Gaza prior to these hostilities. Needs are now, of course, significantly greater. And most crucially, the deliveries made over the past few days do not include fuel. That is essential for powering the services that are needed for people to survive. Without fuel, our humanitarian operation will stop. No fuel means no hospitals functioning, no desalination of water, and no baking. Many people are drinking saline groundwater, increasing the risks of diarrhea, cholera, and other health issues. We urge Israel to bring water and electricity supplies back to pre-conflict levels and to work with us to find a secure way of bringing fuel into Gaza. While we negotiate with the government of Israel as to how best to bring fuel into Gaza, we have 400,000 liters of trucks ready to go. This would provide fuel for approximately 2.5 more days. If the civilians across Gaza are to get access to adequate food, water, medical care, and other essential supplies, we must be able to scale up deliveries of all goods, and we must be able to replenish fuel supplies. It will be important also that the Israeli crossings for the movement of people and goods are opened. I want to express my utmost admiration for the bravery and extraordinary commitment of those delivering life-saving and humanitarian services in Gaza. This includes the incredible staff at UNRWA, many of whom are displaced themselves and who continue to support the most vulnerable despite it all. We must also pay tribute to the 35 UNRWA colleagues who have tragically been killed. I urge the Council to redouble funding to UNRWA and other humanitarian agencies on the ground without delay so they can continue these indispensable efforts. Mr. President, today of all days, when we celebrate the United Nations, we must all continue to demand respect for international humanitarian law. The parties on all sides must take constant care to spare civilians, including medical and humanitarian personnel, civilian objects, including homes, hospitals, and humanitarian assets. Civilians must have the essentials to survive, and to this end, the passage of rapid and unimpeded and increased humanitarian relief must be facilitated and water and electricity connections resumed. I urge all countries with influence to exert it and ensure respect for the rules of war. Mr. President, agreement on the resumption of aid deliveries and the release of a small number of hostages over the past few days shows that through diplomacy, negotiations, humanity can prevail, and we can find humanitarian solutions, even in the depths of this conflict. In this spirit, I reiterate the Secretary General's call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire to ease this epic human suffering. If we are to prevent any further descent into this humanitarian catastrophe, dialogue must continue to ensure essential supplies can get into Gaza at the scale needed, to spare civilians and the infrastructure they depend on, to release hostages, and to avoid any further escalation and spillover. The world is looking to the member states around this council to play its part in leading the way. Thank you.
I thank Mrs. Lynn Hastings for her briefing, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Riyad Al-Maliki, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of the Observer State of Palestine.
Mr. President, we are here today to stop the killing, to stop the massacres being committed against the Palestinian people. The ongoing massacres being deliberately and systematically and savagely perpetrated by Israel, the occupying power, against the Palestinian civilian population under its illegal occupation must be stopped. The Security Council has a duty to stop them. The international community is obliged under international law to stop them. It is our collective human duty to stop them. Now, continued failure at this council is inexcusable. Mr. President, we express appreciation to Brazil for convening this session of the Security Council and elevating its participation in light of the gravity of the situation we are facing. We thank the Secretary General of the United Nations for his sobering briefing and for his tireless efforts, and that of the UN agencies and humanitarian staff on the ground, particularly UNRWA, working round the clock under the most inhumane conditions to aid our people and uphold a minimum sense of humanity. We mourn with them the senseless killing of UNRWA staff and other humanitarian workers, including doctors, nurses, and paramedics, who were directly targeted by this ongoing barbarous aggression. They are heroic champions of humanity at a time of abject depravity. Mr. President, over 2 million Palestinians are on a survival mission every day, every night. By the time representatives are done delivering their speeches today, 150 Palestinians will have been killed, including 60 children. In the last 2 weeks, over 5,700 Palestinians have been killed, including over 2,300 children and 1,300 women. Compared to the population of Gaza, that is the equivalent of 145,000 British citizens or 700,000 US citizens. Almost all those killed by Israel are civilians. Over 1 million displaced, 170,000 housing units destroyed. Excellencies, only international law and peace are worthy of your country's unconditional support. More injustice and more killing will not make Israel safer. No amount of weapons, no alliance will bring to it security. Only peace will. Peace with Palestine and its people. The fate of the Palestinian people cannot continue to be dispossession, displacement, denial of rights, and death. Our freedom is the condition of shared peace and security. You have all spoken of the Palestinian people's legitimate grievances, addressing them, of their legitimate aspirations, help achieving them, of their right to self-determination, support its realization. For those actively engaged to avoid an even greater humanitarian catastrophe and regional spillover, it must be clear that this can only be achieved by putting an immediate end to the Israeli war launched against the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip. Stop the bloodshed. There is no amount of humanitarian aid that can address the situation if more death, destruction, and devastation are imposed on our people in Gaza. There is no way to contain underlying tensions in our region if that reality does not change. There are so many fronts open for war and none for peace. Some of my colleagues spoke to me about the pain and anger of the bereaved families. Every family in Gaza is a bereaved family. No one is spared. No one is safe. Where is the solidarity with them? Where is the empathy towards them? Where is the outrage for their killing? If these expressions are genuine, they cannot be accompanied by excuses for the killer and reasons for him to continue the killing. We should be on the same side, all of us who believe in justice and in peace, in the rule of international law, in the value and sanctity of human life. We should stand shoulder to shoulder in these moments. But that is only possible if everyone recognizes the value of Palestinian life, the need to uphold Palestinian rights. This is only possible if you offer unconditional support to the rule of international law and the objective of peace, not to those breaching the former and destroying the latter. Sooner or later, you will have to admit that the interests of your countries and those of this Israeli government are not aligned, but rather opposed. The sooner you recognize it, the more lives can be saved, the more chance we have to walk back from the abyss. It may be hard to imagine in these circumstances a different reality. The effort and energy it would take, the difficult choices it implies, the political cost it carries, the changes to policies it entails. But as we said repeatedly, it is worth it. Because of the alternative, the one we are living in right now, the one the Palestinian people have been experiencing for decades. There is a reality where no Palestinians and no Israelis are killed, where all enjoy equal measures of freedom, peace, and security. That reality is the one that deserves all your efforts and all your resources. Invest in peace, not war. Support justice, not vengeance. Stand for freedom, not justify continued subjugation and occupation. Billions of people from all faiths and all origins care about the fate of the Palestinian people. They measure against it all the statements and positions of your countries. They consider it the ultimate test for the values one proclaims and the norms we all enacted. In Gaza, under the rebels lies over 1,000 Palestinians and all the values and all the norms. Under the bombs, 2 million Palestinians and all the values and all the norms. Abandoning the Palestinian people is betraying those values and norms. You either rescue the international law-based order or leave it to die there. We thank all those who have taken an equivocal position and offered support, starting with the countries of our region, who understand more than any other the implications of the continued inhumane and barbaric attacks against our people, but also countries across the globe. Peoples in your streets, the moral voices of this world, please listen to them. You have families, and some of you evoked them when Israelis were killed. How you could not but think of your loved ones and what pain and suffering you would feel if they had endured a similar fate. I am therefore convinced you cannot be numb to a reality where all the people you love, your parents, grandparents, siblings, children, grandchildren, aunts, uncles, and cousins, and in-laws are all in danger of imminent death, or worse, have all been killed in one strike, in one instant. That is happening repeatedly. Can you feel their pain? Can you imagine the day after for them, for that child who is the only survival for his entire family? Can you then imagine how we feel when anyone claims this is for the better? Can you imagine your loved ones besieged and bombed, deprived of the essential goods for their survival, their fate dependent on decision to allow or prevent fuel, water, and food from entering, with any delay meaning a death sentence for many? Families should be reunited in life, not in death. If you say you are for international law, international humanitarian law, and for protection of civilians, then nothing can justify what Israel is doing. This is targeting of civilians, or at best inhumane, unlawful, indiscriminate attacks. This is collective punishment. Once you remove the principles of humanity and distinction from the laws of war, nothing remains. These are crimes and should be treated as such. What Israel is doing is constant with its belief that we are subhumans, or human animals, as they put it. But surely you don't share that belief. You do not believe our lives are less worthy, less sacred, more expendable. So imagine what you would do if bombs were falling on Israel, killing civilians by the thousands, and then ask why is this any different? Israel has killed thousands of Palestinians over the years, and yet no one suggested that entitled us to start killing Israeli civilians, neither under a right to defend ourselves, to protect our own, or to resist. Your message was always clear. Nothing can justify killing Israeli civilians. Well, nothing justifies killing Palestinian civilians. Nothing. I will turn now to speak in Arabic, please. السيد الرئيس، أليست مسؤولية مجلس الأمن حفظ
The Council's duty to maintain international peace and security and preserving the principles and purposes of the UN Charter that have guaranteed to our peoples to save the generations from the scourge of war, and taking these joint and effective measures to prevent the causes that threaten peace as per the principles of international law and justice? Or is it difficult for your Security Council to uphold its responsibility and its mandate and resolutions without selectivity or double standards when it relates to Palestine? Is it not the Security Council's role to address the aggression that targets newborn babies and men and women and children, and providing Palestinian civilians with protection against the continued crimes of the occupation, and addressing the root causes of the issue, and addressing the reasons for instability and insecurity which represent the desire of the occupying Israeli power to colonize the Palestinian people. Peace and security pass through the gate of empowering the Palestinians and their enjoyment of their inalienable rights, and not through evading this path and ignoring their suffering. Mr. President, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and I quote, "Disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind," end quote. Here, I address the international community and ask, represented by your council, is your human conscience not offended by the crimes of the Israeli occupation over the course of 56 years of its colonial occupation, or by the terrorism, killing, destruction, and starvation to which the Palestinian people are exposed today? Doesn't this wholesale killing offend you through the Israeli targeting of innocent persons and houses of worship and other civilian objects, and the humanitarian staff? Depriving our people of their humanity does not offend you. The statements by Israeli officials do not offend you that call for ethnic cleansing and genocide, and that describe the Palestinian people and children as children of darkness and as human animals in order to allow for killing. Does this not offend the conscience, the continued blockade for 16 years and the starvation of the people and the prevention of water, food, fuel, and other necessary supplies? Does this not offend the human conscience to target civilians in Gaza, as well as Jerusalem and in the West Bank, and the desecration of holy sites and the magnitude of civilians that must fall so that your august council can call for ending this madness and impunity? Do not mistake the devastating war against the civilians in the Gaza Strip is an extension of the aggression by this occupation against our people to continue its colonization of our land. Peace and security cannot and will not be achieved by crushing the skulls of infants, or through wiping out Gaza, or turning it into a hell, or reducing its area, as has been announced repeatedly by everyone who carries out this killing and destruction. It will also not materialize by arming thousands of terrorist settlers and encouraging them to continue their terror attacks against our people in Jerusalem and the occupied West Bank. Mr. President, the Palestinian children in Gaza are writing their names on their hands so that they not become unknown corpses, and so that they not be buried in collective graves. This is a revenge against children and women and civilians, which has been agreed by the world to prevent, and the purposes of the UN Charter has sought to contain that and prevent it. Yes, Mr. President, Israel is avenging against women and children and the entire Palestinian people. They are taking revenge on the victim that continues to demand its rights to freedom and independence and return. The people who remain resilient in the face of aggression, supported by hate speech, led by the occupying authorities who want to continue the crime of the Nakba. As our great poet has said, Mahmoud Darwish, we are the victim that has tried all forms of killing, including the most modern weapons, but we are the miracle that does not die and cannot die. End quote. The world witnesses the killing and destruction and mass arrests and displacement carried out by Israel against the Palestinian people, and has coexisted with these crimes and impunity and even protected it instead of searching for a radical solution to the occupation. Ending the occupation and realizing the rights of the Palestinian people is the only way to ensure regional and international stability, security, and peace, not killing more Palestinians. The serious escalation in the area is mainly caused by the absence of rights, and therefore the urgent solution required from the Council today is to call for immediate cessation of the Israeli aggression and ceasefire, and to work urgently to secure humanitarian access in all parts of the Gaza Strip, and to end the forced displacement, and to provide international protection for the Palestinian people and achieve justice through accountability. In addition to the necessary practical measures to address the root causes of the issue and end the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory, with Jerusalem as the capital of a Palestinian state, as per your resolutions and as per the peace process and international law, and also empowering the Palestinians to enjoy their inalienable rights, including the return of refugees and self-determination, as per Resolution 194. War and peace start from Palestine. Our area has suffered enough wars. Gaza today is the world capital. All eyes are fixed on Gaza. Do not fail the test. There's a resilient people in Gaza who have tolerated what no human can tolerate. Enough torture, enough killing, enough injustice. Long live Gaza, and long live Palestine, and long live freedom, so that peace can live for long. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Al-Maliki for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Eli Cohen, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Israel.
Mr. President, Minister of Foreign Affairs, members of the Security Council, as we meet here today, young babies, children are held in Gaza. This is beyond imagination, a living nightmare. Ofri, 10 years old, Avigail, 3 years old, Maya, 17 years old, Raz, 4 years old, Aviv, 2 years old, Ariel, 4 years old, Kfir, little Kfir, only 9 months, Yuval, 8 years old, Ofir, 17 years old. There are just a few of the many children and babies that have not seen evil. They have not caused evil, but they are victims of evil. These kids witness horror which cannot be described by words. Mr. Secretary General, in what world do you live? Definitely, this is not our world. Do I want to remember the creation of hell, the shouts of the raiders in joining the hunt, cries of the wounded begging for life, faces of mothers craved with pain, hiding children, dripping with fear? No, I don't want to remember. But how can I forget? Do I want to remember this world upside down? Families vanish in the midst of the day. The mass grave steaming with vapor of blood. Mothers screaming for children in vain. No, I have to remember and never let you forget. This heart-burning poem was written by Alexander Kimmel, a Holocaust survivor in 1942. 5 years later, the United Nations General Assembly voted in favor of the creation of the Jewish state, the birth of the State of Israel. 75 years ago was a clear statement: never again, never again. Saturday, October 7, will go down in history as nothing less than a brutal massacre. Saturday, October 7, is a wake-up call for the entire free world, a wake-up call against extremism and terror. On that day, over 1,500 terrorists of Hamas and Islamic Jihad infiltrated Israel from the south with a viciousness exceeded even ISIS, killing over 1,400 babies, children, women, and men, and wounded over 4,000. They went from house to house, slaughtering entire families and individuals in the beds, on the streets, on the way to the synagogue, raping women, burned them alive, dancing and chanting on people's bodies. You have not been there. You have not seen the horror or smell it. Let us pause for a moment. Think about many innocent people that just wake up on Saturday morning. So many of them are not yet brought to a final burial. And let's recite the immortal words of the Jewish prayer for the dead, the Kaddish. Itgadal v'yitkadash shmei rabbah. This massacre will go down in history as more brutal than ISIS. Hamas are new Nazis. Hamas are the new Nazis. Just as the civilized world united defeat the Nazis, just as the civilized world united to defeat ISIS, the civilized world has to stand united behind Israel to defeat Hamas. Let us not mistaken about Hamas' intention. I'm sure, Secretary General, you can read it. Its charter clearly calls for the destruction and elimination of the State of Israel. This will never be. Over 220 were taken hostage. Among the hostages, children who have seen their parents murdered. Holocaust survivor, elderly in need for care and medicine. We call for immediate the Red Cross access to all the hostages and their unconditional release. Present in this room, Moran Aloni. 7 members of his family were taken hostage. Moran's sister, Sharon Aloni Konyo, and Danielle Aloni were kidnapped with Sharon's husband, David, and their 3-year-old twins, Emma and Yuli. 3-year-old twin. Right now, while we are sitting here, they are held by the Hamas. Alongside Daniel's 5-year-old daughter, Amelia. Early morning, early Saturday, on the 7th of October, Sharon wrote on her family group chat that there are Hamas terrorists in their home, and they are hiding in the safe room. A few minutes later, she wrote that the terrorists set the house on fire, since if they are not able to enter into the room and to slaughter them, they burn the houses in order they will get out. And they written that they are choking in the safe room. A few minutes later, Moran received a private message from his sister. "We are dying. Help us." The family received information that Sharon, Daniel, Emma, Yuli, Emilia, David, and Ariel, David's brother, are held in captive by Hamas terrorists in Gaza. Here with us is another family, Hersh Goldberg-Polin, a young man, age 23, one of the beautiful and innocent participants in the music festival. Hersh is seriously injured. On his phone, the last 2 text messages he managed to send to his parents before he was kidnapped to Gaza: "I love you. I'm sorry." That's what he wrote to his parents. There are other family here with us today, the family of Itai Chen, Kit and Aviva Segal, Liad Benin, Idan Alexander, Omer Ventura, and there is so many more. Qatar, which financed and harbor of Hamas leaders, could influence and enable the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages held by the terrorists. You, members of the international community, should demand Qatar to do just that. The meeting should conclude with a clear message: bring them home. Bring them home. I would like to listen to this recording.
طب انا قاعد اكلمك من جوا بسيم، افتح الواتس تبعي قول له وين، شوف كيف القتلى، شوف كيف قتلت بيدي يابا، ابنك قتل يهود، هاي دخلوا بسيم يابا. ربنا يحميك يا رب، ربنا يحميك يابا، ربنا يحميك. قاعد اكلمك من جوال يهودية، قتلتها وقتلت جوزها.
This is a terrorist of Hamas. What he said there in Arabs, he's telling to his mother and fathers that he is proud that he has blood of 10 Jewish that he murdered. What monster they gave a birth to. Secretary General, this is the world that we live. We give Palestinian Gaza till the last millimeter. There is no dispute in regards to the land of Gaza. But they take the money they receive from the world, and instead of building hospital, office building, commercial center, they took the money to dig tunnels, to build rocket factory, not for the favor of the people. This is one example. And you see, and you can show all the movie that they film, and they're proud of this. The low lives were not speaking on behalf of Islam, human values, or fight for freedom. They were speaking on behalf of cruelty, malice, and hate. And you should all ask yourself, ladies and gentlemen, who do we face? We, Israel, we don't only have the right to defend ourselves. We have the duty to do so. This is not a right. This is a duty. I want to speak to all of you and to tell you, the West is next. The West is next. The war which was imposed on us, there is no side. This war was imposed on us. Is not only Israel's war. It is the war of the free world. I hear the call for proportionality. I hear the calls, as said Lynn before, for a ceasefire. Tell me, what is a proportionate response for killing of babies? for rape women and burn them, for beheading of a child. How you can agree to a ceasefire with someone who swore to kill and destroy your own existence? How? The proportional response to October 7 massacre is a total destruction to the last one of the Hamas. It is not only Israel's right to destroy Hamas, it's our duty. For Israel, it's a matter of survival. The free world should remember and never forget what happened on October 7th. Today, this barbaric terror hit Israel. Tomorrow, it will be at everyone's doorstep, at everyone's doorstep. These terrorists don't have only Israel destruction in mind. Their dream is the world. Read about it. Exactly like the Nazis. They say it. They are willing to expand. This war was imposed on us. We have not chosen this war, but have no doubt we are going to win it. We are going to win it because this war is for life. This war must be your war as well. As Iran's proxy, Hamas, has three objectives to its barbarous attack: the murder of Jews, the kidnapping of hostages, and derailing the expansion of peace, stability, and normalization in our region. United will and purpose like never before. Israel must now act in an unprecedented way to ensure Hamas objectives will never be met. Will never be met. This is the aim, the 18th day since the beginning of this war. Through the last 18 days, our citizens were under heavy missile and rocket fire from Gaza, and not only from Gaza. There is a clear attempt on escalating and provoking a war on our northern border, whereas Iran proxy Hezbollah is targeting our cities. The objective of Hamas, its patron and collaborator is clear. They will not succeed. Not only from neighboring country, Israel is facing threat. Last week, cruise missiles were launched at Israel from Yemen. Have no illusion who is behind it and what is the reason. I'm telling to our Arab country and neighbor, we share the same threat of Iran and the terror organization. The same threat. I stand here in front of you saying loud and clear, this war will be won. And for the international community to understand who is under threat and who is the aggressor. Mr. President, colleagues, permanent representative, the world now is facing a clear choice of moral clarity. One can be either part of the civilized world or surrounded to the forces of evil and barbarism. Hamas savages and their friends. There is no middle ground, no room for moral ambiguity, no room for this. I want to thank all the government who's already designated Hamas as a terror organization, and I call others to do it immediately. I want to thank the United States, President Biden and Secretary Blinken for showing such a moral clarity, for standing with Israel in word and deed at this dark hour. Thank you. I also wish to thank the many other leaders from across the world who have come to stand with Israel in this difficult time. I would like to remind you, the Charter here of the United Nations, which you all signed, begins with this word: we, the people of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind. Today, after the most vicious and brutal terror attack in the modern history, if all nations do not stand decisively and clearly by the innocent orphans left alone in the world, by the kids that were slaughtered while dancing at sunrise, by the Holocaust survivors murdered or kidnapped, stand by Israel on our mission to eliminate the monsters from the face of the earth. If all nations do not stand by the basic value of humanity described in the UN Charter, this will be the darkest hour of United Nations under you, Mr. Secretary. At this place, will have no moral justification to exist. At this difficult time for the people of Israel, we say loudly, we are strong. We will rebuild. We are determined and resolved to achieve our dream, to be a free nation in our land, the land of Zion and Jerusalem. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Cohen, for his...
Well, thank you very much for joining us on A Full View. The conclusion there of a submission by the Israeli Foreign Affairs Minister, and this is Eli Cohen, addressing the United Nations on the situation in Israel. And with the closing words there, throwing down the gauntlet to the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, there will be no justification for the UN to exist, depending on how it acts in this moment.
And this, of course, is the United Nations Security Council debate. It's an open debate on the Middle East, looking at what is happening there. He says that Saturday, the 7th of October, was a brutal call. He says Hamas is a terrorist organization, must be dealt with. But at the same time, I don't know, you think about the fact that there's this mention of the beheading, and yet we keep hearing about how that has not been verified. The videos that were put out were not being verified. Even the American president himself also had to, be told by his own officials that this is something that's not verified.
And this is, in a sense, some of the questions that have been raised about the veracity of what's been put forward, not only in fora at the United Nations Security Council, but in other fora. And it'll be interesting to see how that debate develops and whether any of these submissions are being made will be challenged. Just to let you know that our own Foreign Affairs and International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor is 24 on the list. We're at number 7 now. We understand that Brazil is to give its submission next, but it's possibly the United States as well. So we will just keep it, and it will be fluid. And as soon as we see a crossing that we want to make into that quarterly open debate on the Middle East, we will take you there live.
And of course, this is happening against the backdrop of what is currently happening in the Middle East. To think about the fact that there's still calls for more aid to be able to be allowed into Gaza, so more and more people can be able to benefit. So far, Iman, hearing even over the weekend from those who are on the ground saying that the aid that has been allowed is only just a drop in the ocean. There is so much desperation on the ground, and quite a lot is unfolding as far as this story is concerned, and we'll keep you covered.
Yeah, a real-life picture on that from one of the earlier presenters on the panel, Lynn Hastings, Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process. So there we have it right now. As we've been saying, the UN Security Council holding that quarterly open debate on the Middle East, and it is the fourth one that they've had amidst escalating violence in the region.
And UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres had this to say a little earlier on.
Excellencies, even war has rules. We must demand that all parties uphold and respect their obligations under international humanitarian law, take constant care in the conduct of military operations to spare civilians, and respect and protect hospitals, and respect the inviolability of UN facilities, which today are sheltering more than 600,000 Palestinians. The relentless bombardment of Gaza by Israeli forces, the level of civilian casualties, and the wholesale destruction of neighborhoods continue to mount and are deeply alarming. I mourn and honor dozens of UN colleagues working for UNRWA. Sadly, at least 35 and counting, killed in the bombardment of Gaza over the last 2 weeks. I owe to their families my condemnation of these and many other similar killings. The protection of civilians is paramount in any armed conflict. Protecting civilians can never mean using them as human shields. Protecting civilians does not mean ordering more than 1 million people to evacuate to the south, where there is no shelter, no food, no water, no medicine, and no fuel, and then continuing to bomb the south itself. I am deeply concerned about the clear violations of international humanitarian law that we are witnessing in Gaza. Let me be clear, no party to an armed conflict is above international humanitarian law. Excellencies, thankfully some humanitarian relief is finally getting into Gaza, but it is a drop of aid in an ocean of need. In addition, our UN fuel supplies in Gaza will run out in a matter of days, and that would be another disaster. Without fuel, aid cannot be delivered, hospitals will not have power, and drinking water cannot be purified or even pumped. The people of Gaza need continuous aid delivery at a level that corresponds to the enormous needs, and that aid must be delivered without restrictions. I salute our UN colleagues and humanitarian partners in Gaza working under hazardous conditions and risking their lives to provide aid to those in need. They are an inspiration. To ease epic suffering, make the delivery of aid easier and safer, and facilitate the release of hostages, I reiterate my appeal for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire.